We saw in the movie Your Inner Fish that a long, long time ago, humans shared a common ancestor with fish. It's like if you imagined your own family tree. You're pretty closely related to siblings because the most recent common ancestor you share are your parents. You're a little bit less closely related to your cousins because you have to go back to your grandparents to find a common ancestor. You would never say that you evolved from your cousin. That's like when people say humans evolved from monkeys. Monkeys are incredibly distant cousins of ours because a very, very long time ago we shared a common ancestor, a great, 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 okay, you get the point. But there's a lot of greats that uh, even a lot more greats than that, great-grandparents. But how do we get to be a totally different species? By the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe how new species form and compare and contrast different types of reproductive isolation. I'm also going to ask you at the end if you can explain what's accurate and what's inaccurate about this cartoon. So be thinking about that as you go along. One of the ways new species can form is through the founder's effect. A new small group from a larger population goes to some new place. In this diagram, we can almost physically trace their genes. Imagine that each of the dots in the picture is an allele. We start out with a population of purple alleles, or a mixture of blue and red phenotypes. Then, for some reason, part of the individuals go to a new habitat, probably by accident. Animals really aren't that smart. Because there's new selective pressures in their habitats that weren't in the original habitat, natural selection begins to act on these traits. For example, imagine in the new habitat that seeds available to the species of bird are so large that these large seeds serve as a selective pressure so that the average phenotype of beaks also gets larger to accommodate these new larger seeds. This, by the way, is an example of directional selection. Over time, as the organisms and natural disasters continue to reshape the environment, new selective pressures arise that are not present in the original habitat. As these small changes build up, eventually the birds that left the mainland look different than the birds that are left. If enough genetic differences build up between them, a new species can form. A species is a group of individuals that can mate and produce fertile offspring. The process of forming a new species is called speciation. Darwin observed this when he visited the Galapagos Islands. He saw tortoises with different shells on each of the different islands. He could almost tell what island this tortoise came from because of its shell. Because they lived on different islands, they experienced different selective pressures and slowly became more and more different from each other. The real problem with being on different islands is that the tortoises Darwin observed could no longer mate. In order for species to form, it's necessary that two groups that formerly interbred are now reproductively isolated. There are 3 reasons why organisms couldn't be able to mate. Have you ever had a celebrity crush? Well, when I was in 8th grade, I thought Leonardo DiCaprio was so cute. But even though we're part of the same species, we're reproductively isolated for several reasons. First of all, we're geographically isolated. If for no other reason, it would be difficult to procreate because Leo lives in LA and I lived in Chicago at the time. Organisms that are separated by a river may live close to each other, but if they can't physically get to each other, it's impossible to mate. Also, Leo and I were behaviorally isolated. No doubt he would not have been attracted to the way an 8th grader behaves. Animals display mating behaviors in order to attract members of the opposite sex. Males, believe it or not, are usually the pretty ones in the species because they're competing for mates. But even if peacocks and pigeons live near each other, pigeons are not attracted to the big, beautiful displays of feathers peacocks have, and peacocks are not attracted to whatever ugly ways pigeons try to attract each other. And finally, Mr. DiCaprio and I were temporarily isolated. Leo is 9 years and 1 day older than me. We were not ready to have families at the same time. With animals, this might be differences in mating seasons instead of just differences in ages. Despite all of these reasons why I couldn't reproduce with Leonardo DiCaprio, it's unlikely that celebrities would ever become a separate species. So this picture suggests that some fish-like creatures crawled out of the water and turned into some 4-legged creatures, which then turned into something dinosaur-like, which then turned into an ape-like creature, which finally reached the final goal of humans. Oh, so many things wrong with this picture and my description of it. It makes me shudder. So what do you see in the picture that has some truth to it, and what do you find misleading? Don't forget to take the quiz when you're finished watching the video.